This is the time of year when many people make New Year's resolutions. Anybody make a New Year's resolution? One person? I made some goals, which technically I think are different than resolutions. But many people do make resolutions. Some people don't like to make them because they're afraid that they'll not keep them and they'll fail. But maybe it's better to try than to not try at all. We know the typical New Year's resolutions. We're going to eat better, we're going to exercise more, we're going to get organized as Christians, we're going to read the Bible daily. And these are all good things to resolve to do. But we know that for many of us, we'll get off to a good start. Then, though, we will fail to keep those resolutions. I've made those resolutions in the past and get off to a good start and soon, if these things were easy, we wouldn't need to make resolutions to do them. They would just come naturally. And so we struggle to do these things, and many of us, not to discourage anyone, but we often don't keep the resolutions. I realized that many times I resolved to exercise, go out for a run, do a workout. I need to do that because my job doesn't give me much exercise. But I found that unless it's fun, unless I'm playing a game, just running isn't something that I'll continue to do. So my plan was to join a gym that had an actual gymnasium, and I could play basketball and badminton and all sorts of things. But unfortunately, they're not accepting new members at this time. So maybe later. But we have these resolutions to improve our lives. It's easy to get off to a good start, but it's much more difficult to keep on with that resolution throughout the whole year and then continue that in the years to come. Well, in Hebrews chapter 12, especially verse 2, the author of Hebrews uses running a race as a metaphor for following Jesus. And remember the situation with his original readers. Based on what he's written in this letter, there are many who are going through difficulty and they're tempted to give up, tempted to stop following Jesus. They had begun well, they had gotten off to a good start, but now they were facing adversity and it was more difficult to keep on going. Notice that it says, with endurance. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. That's the theme of the book of Hebrews, to endure, to keep on going, to not give up following Jesus. But these readers, the original readers, they're tempted to quit following Jesus. And so he needs to tell them, run with endurance. You can't follow Jesus without endurance. The kind of race that the author is talking about here is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It requires sustained effort, endurance, perseverance, discipline. In verse 3, he says that he doesn't want his readers to become weary or faint-hearted. But I think that some had already reached that point. They were already weary and faint-hearted. And maybe someone here or maybe someone listening online is feeling that way as well, weary and faint-hearted. And so it's important for us to take heed, to listen to what the author here says about running with endurance. Notice that it's not a command that he gives. He says, let us run with endurance. This is what we call an exhortation. To exhort someone is to encourage. Sometimes exhortation is more effective than a command. You can think of this as a parent. Sometimes you need to say, you need to do this, give them a command. But other times, you need to come alongside them and say, well, let's do this. It's an encouragement. So that's what the author here does. He includes himself in this. He says, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. So he's encouraging them to do this because he senses, I believe, that some of them are feeling weary and faint-hearted. And so how can we run with endurance the race that is set before us? How can we do that? Well, we need to do three things. And we're going to just focus on the first three verses of Hebrews 12 this morning. Actually, especially the first two verses. So the first thing we need to do if we're to run with endurance is we need to look back. Now, I know that when you're running a race, they tell you don't look behind you. I think that's more for a sprint. But what I'm thinking here is looking back in your mind. We all need, maybe we all don't need it, but most of us need some sort of source of motivation to do something difficult. And so he says here in verse 1, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. So the word therefore connects this exhortation to run with endurance to what was written in chapter 11. Now, what was written in chapter 11? What was that chapter all about? It was all about the author talking about Old Testament believers, people who had lived before the coming of Christ into the world, people who lived by faith. You'll see that phrase over and over again. I counted them when we were going through Hebrews 11. I forget how many there were. I think around 20 times the phrase by faith is used in Hebrews chapter 11. So they needed to live by faith. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Hebrews 11, verse 6. So one thing we perhaps don't think much about is what is said in verse 39, Hebrews 11:39. And all of the people he's talked about who lived by faith, though commended through their faith, they pleased God by their faith, they did not receive what was promised. What was promised, meaning what would come through Christ. They died before the coming of Christ into the world. They died before his death and resurrection. And so they didn't see the fulfillment of these promises of God. And maybe we don't think about how they lived not having the kind of hope that we have today. They didn't know about the cross. They didn't know about the empty tomb. Really, they knew very little about, if you study the Old Testament, they knew very little about any sort of afterlife. It wasn't really until the book of Daniel that there's a clear, explicit statement about a resurrection and new life. You might think it says a lot about that in the Psalms, but if you really look about it, it's really not explicit. We interpret it a certain way because we look at things differently because we live after the cross. But even a statement like, "And I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever," in Psalm 23, you look at the previous statement, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And what the psalmist probably was thinking was, all the days of his life, an unknown time into the future. Now, we interpret that a different way today, or apply it a different way. But really, these people who lived back then weren't given a lot of revelation about what would happen after death. They didn't really have the same kind of hope that we have today, and yet they lived by faith. It says they did not receive what was promised in their lives, but we who live after the coming of Christ. And so they lived by faith, and they really are, in a sense, an inspiration to us, that we also can live by faith because we have so much more regarding hope than they did. They're called a great cloud of witnesses. A great cloud here means a large group. It's tempting here to think with the race metaphor that they are witnessing us, that they're spectators, they're surrounding us like in a great stadium. The cloud, you might think of, they're up in the sky looking down upon us, but the word witnesses really means more of that they witness to us. When we read Hebrews chapter 11, that they're speaking to us, that we look to them for encouragement. And so I don't believe he's really saying that these people of the past are watching us and cheering us on. Maybe they do a little bit of that, but I don't think that's what the author here is saying. He's saying that really we look to them, not that they are looking at us. We look to them for encouragement. So look back, he says. We need some motivation. Well, there's some motivation there. People in the past have lived by faith, and these people lived by faith even though they never received in their life what God had promised to his people. Christ did not come before their deaths. Then number two, second thing we need to do if we're to run with endurance, we need to look within. Now, I don't mean we need to look within for some sort of inspiration within ourselves. Look at what second part of verse 1 says. Let us also lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely. So look within the sense of look at ourselves, look at our hearts, see if there are any hindrances that prevent us from running well or living the Christian life well or following Jesus as we should. We need to get rid of anything that will prevent us from doing that. The weight here, in the race, the weight would be heavy clothing, it would be excess body weight, something that would prevent us from running the best that we could. What are some things that weigh us down? Well, you know better than I do. I could throw out a lot of possibilities, but maybe a habit, maybe something that weighs us down, that distracts us perhaps. And what might be a hindrance to one person might not be a hindrance to another. And so it's important for us to search our own hearts and lives. He says, also the sin. Lay aside the sin which clings so closely. Again, the metaphor of running the race, clothing that clings to us, that prevents us from running. I think the sins that would most prevent us from giving up, or for keeping on and giving up, would be really the sin of loving something more than following Jesus, loving something more than him. And if it becomes difficult to follow Jesus, then we give that up because we love something else more. If there was something that we had to give up or something we had to experience in order to keep on following Jesus, would we do it? Or do we love that other thing more than we love Jesus? And so that was a question that the original readers had to ask. They were beginning to face persecution. You know, their livelihoods perhaps were at stake. Their reputations among family members perhaps were at stake. And it's a choice. Well, what do I love more? Do I love my reputation more? Do I love my bank account more? Do I love my job more? Do I love my comfort more than Jesus? Or do I love him more? So look within our hearts. Do we have a heart that will give up? Or do we have a heart that loves Jesus? And then thirdly, we're to look up. I think this is the main one. Look up. We can have all sorts of sources of motivation, saints of the past, maybe people in our own lives. But the supreme source of motivation is Jesus. Look at verse 2. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith. He's the one who's gone before us. When he was on this earth, he really lived by faith, faith in the Father. He showed us what it means to live by faith. And what did he do? It says he endured the cross. You'll find the word endured in both verses 2 and 3. Verse 3, consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself. I believe he's still thinking about the cross, thinking of the beating, the flogging, the mocking, the crucifixion. Consider him, Jesus, who endured from sinners such hostility against himself. A crucifixion, maybe we perhaps don't appreciate what that was back in the first century. Crucifixion involved torture. It involved public humiliation. Those who were crucified were considered subhuman, unfit to live. In thinking on that, we could go back to the very beginning of the book of Hebrews, where the writer says that Jesus, the Son, is the exact imprint of the Father, which means he's exactly like the Father. And if you study the Bible says there's no one like God. And so for Jesus to be exactly like the Father can only mean that he is God. When you put it all together, you understand that though there is only one God, he exists as three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so Jesus is the Son, God the Son. And so it was God on that cross. God who became flesh and lived among us. It was God on that cross. For all to see, publicly humiliated and tortured. He endured the cross. Despising the shame, it says. And what does that mean? I always thought it meant, well, he hated the shame. But really it means something a little bit different. To despise, or the NIV says scorn, scorning the shame, it means that you treat it as insignificant, of little consequence. And so what he was saying is that though what he endured was great, it was of little consequences. Of little consequence, it was insignificant. He despised it. He scorned it because of the joy that was set before him, it says. And what was that joy that was set before him? It says, he is now seated at the right hand of the throne of God. And so he endured that cross. scorning or despising the shame, treating it as insignificant because it was insignificant compared to the joy that would be his, that he would be seated at the right hand of the throne of God on the other side of the cross. And this was something that was not just for him alone. Going over to Revelation chapter 3, verse 21. These are the words of Jesus himself. He says, the one who conquers. In this context, that means the one who faithfully endures, who runs with endurance. The one who conquers, I will grant him to sit with me on my throne as I also conquered, as he also faithfully endured the cross, and sat down with my Father on his throne. And so he's inviting us to share in the joy that is his in glory. The joy that was set before him. Have you ever thought of what makes Jesus happy? I know we like to distinguish between joy and happiness, but really, I've said this before, the two are the same. There's happiness in circumstances, though, and there's happiness in the Lord. But joy and happiness mean the same thing. And so you could say for the happiness set before him or the joy that was set before him, whichever you'd like to say. But what makes Jesus happy? I've been reading a book by Dane Ortland. It's called Gentle and Lowly. The title is taken from Matthew 11:29, which I read earlier, where Jesus says, I am gentle and lowly in heart. And one of the chapters is entitled The Happiness of Christ. I have a few quotes here from the book. I just thought I would read them because I thought they were good. You don't often read a book about the heart of Christ. What makes him happy? And these are quotes. Just read them quickly. He says, Christ gets more joy and comfort than we do when we come to him for help and mercy. When you come to Christ for mercy and love and help in your anguish and perplexity and sinfulness, you are going with the flow of his own deepest wishes, not against them. Sometimes we might think, well, yeah, he'll receive me, but maybe he won't be so happy to receive me because of maybe who I am or my past or what I've done. But that's not really what we see in the life of Jesus. When we hold back, lurking in the shadows, fearful and failing, we miss out not only on our own increased comfort, but on Christ's increased comfort. He lives for this. This is what he loves to do. His joy and ours rise and fall together. And so he is happy when we are happy in the right way. What joy? And speaking of Hebrews 12, verse 2, the joy that was set before him. What joy? What was waiting for Jesus on the other side of the cross? The joy of seeing his people forgiven. So Jesus being seated in heaven indicates that his work has been finished. And when he invites us to sit with him on his throne, that tells us that he invites us to enjoy the benefits of what he has done for us. He has died to take away our sins. And so he wants each one of us to know the joy of sins forgiven. And that is what brings him the greatest joy. That is what makes Jesus happy. Let's just end by thinking about that statement, the race that is set before us. We've entered a new year, 2021. We don't know what the race will be like in this year. We don't know all of the twists and the turns that we'll have to navigate. We don't know the hills that we'll have to climb. For some, it might be more difficult of a race than for others. And it's important for us as believers to encourage one another, especially those who are finding it difficult in the race. We all need to look to Jesus, the one who endured the cross for us, the one who lived by faith. He endured, and he encourages us also to endure. When someone finishes a race, a marathon, wins first place, gets that gold medal, when they're interviewed, they usually talk about all of the hard work, all of the discipline, how hard the race was. But they'll always say that it was worth it. It was worth it to endure, to be disciplined, to keep on going and not give up. And that's what the book of Hebrews is all about. It might be difficult, it might be hard to endure, it might not always be easy to be a Christian, but in the end, it will be worth it.